I'll never forget the exact moment my son said those words. He was standing in front of me, a drink in his hand, faking a smile, while everyone waited for me to blow out the candle on the cake. The living room was full of murmurs, forced laughs, and that fake enthusiasm you only get at family gatherings, where love turned into protocol a long time ago. Lucy, my daughter-in-law, was laughing way too loud. The kids were playing without paying any attention, and Daniel, my own son, was staring impatiently at his phone. Then I heard him. It wasn't a shout, not a direct insult. It was worse. A phrase muttered under his breath, loaded with contempt and poison. I hope this is the last candle he ever blows out. For an instant, the air stood still. No one else seemed to hear it. Only me. The sound of those words stuck in my chest like a knife. I didn't react. I couldn't. I looked at him in silence, with that kind of calm you only learn after you've suffered too much. I smiled, pretending I hadn't heard, and blew out the candle as the smoke rose slowly, as if it wanted to carry away the little faith I had left in my own blood. Everyone clapped, laughed, hugged me. Daniel didn't even come over. And yet, as the echo of the applause faded among the glasses and silverware, I found myself looking at him with a serenity that baffled him. My wish already came true, I told him, looking him straight in the eye. You'll find out tomorrow. That line made him frown. I just smiled faintly. No one understood what I meant, but inside me, something had definitively shattered. After the cake, everyone went back to their superficial conversations. They talked about trips, new cars, business deals, things that had stopped mattering to me a long time ago. I watched in silence, like someone watching a play that has nothing to do with them. I had spent my entire life building that home, working endless hours, giving up dreams, rest, myself, so that they would want for nothing. I had lost my wife, Teresa, 8 years ago now. And since then, I clung to Daniel as the only tie that kept me standing. But he made a point of cutting that tie little by little, with indifference, with pride, with the same contempt he treated me with now. When everyone left, silence was my only guest. I stayed, looking at the extinguished candle on the half-eaten cake. The smoke still drew shapes in the air, as if trying to tell me something. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at the empty table. I thought about Teresa, about how she would have reacted if she had heard her son say that to me. She always used to say, "Daniel has a fire in him, but if he doesn't learn to tend the flame, he'll end up burning what he loves." And that's what had happened. He had burned the respect, the tenderness, and the memory of his mother. The clock struck 11:30 when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. Brief, dry, almost mocking. "Thanks for dinner, old man. Don't forget to pay the home insurance. Good night." I smiled, not with rage, but with understanding. There was nothing left to save. I lost him years ago, but now I was finally accepting it. I turned off the dining room lights and went up to my room. In the hallway hung a photo of Teresa, her serene smile, her clear eyes. I stopped in front of it and murmured, "There's nothing more to be done, my love, but I promise you, tomorrow everything will change." I got into bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the ticking of the clock, planning in silence. I had made hard decisions in my life, but none like the one I made that night. It wasn't revenge moving me, but justice. An intimate, moral justice, the kind that doesn't need courts or witnesses, only the weight of a conscience that can no longer stay silent. I remembered when Daniel was a boy. He'd ask me to pick him up to blow out the candles, and he'd hug me tight, repeating, "Make a wish, Dad." My wish back then was always the same, that he'd grow up with kindness, that he'd know how to love, that he'd never forget that a good heart is worth more than any inheritance. But the years changed him, or maybe it was the world, or Lucy, or the money, I don't know. I only know that the boy who once looked at me with admiration had become a stranger I no longer recognized. At midnight, I got up. I went to my desk and opened the safe. Inside were documents, deeds, bank accounts, everything I had spent decades building through sheer effort. I looked at them calmly. Each page represented years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and also silences swallowed out of pride. I took out the folders, arranged them on the desk, and began to review them one by one. I knew exactly what I had to do. There would be no more begging, no more late apologies, no more empty conversations. What my son had destroyed with words, I would seal with actions. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you've subscribed to the channel and if you're liking this story. This helps me see that you're with me and enjoying what I'm writing from the heart. Now, let's keep going. I spent the rest of the night reading old papers, reviewing memories. Each document was like a mirror of my life. The house, the woodshop, the joint accounts, everything was still legally in my name. I never transferred anything, not even after Daniel demanded it so many times. He told me it was for security, but what he wanted was control. He wanted power. I smiled, realizing that without knowing it, I had held the key to everything all along. Life has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. At 5 a.m, I went out to the back patio. The air was cold, and the sky was just beginning to turn pink. I looked at the horizon and felt a strange peace. "Happy birthday, you old idiot," Daniel had said to me in a mocking tone as he poured my wine. But that phrase didn't hurt anymore. Now it was a reminder, because this day, more than a birthday, would be a rebirth. When I went back inside, I took a blank sheet of paper and wrote 3 words in a firm hand. "Wish granted, son." I left them on the table, next to the extinguished birthday candle. The sun was starting to stream through the window when I dialed the number for Robert Sullivan, my lawyer and lifelong friend. He answered, half asleep. "Edward, what's wrong?" "The time has come," I told him. "Today, I start over." I hung up without saying another word. The house was silent, but inside me, something was beating hard. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity. And that flame, after being out for years, was burning again. I slept little that night, and what little sleep I got was strange, heavy, full of echoes from the past. I dreamed of Daniel as a boy, running through the yard with his hands covered in mud, laughing while his mother chased him with the hose in her hand. I dreamed of his pure laughter, of that look of admiration he'd give me every time I taught him something, as if he believed his father could fix anything. I woke up with a bitter feeling, with the certainty that that boy had died a long time ago, and what was left now was a man who looked at me with indifference, almost with shame. I sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes, looking at the hands that had once held his. These same hands had built the house where he grew up, the same ones that picked him up when he fell, the same ones that fed him when his mother got sick. And now, these hands seemed foreign, old, tired. Maybe that's what he saw when he looked at me. A burden, a relic of the past that was no longer useful in his new world. The morning coffee tasted bitter, or maybe it was my mouth that couldn't taste things anymore. As I drank, I looked out the window at the garden Teresa had cared for so much. The withered flowers seemed to match my mood. Ever since she died, everything had gone downhill. Her absence changed everything. Daniel loved her, of course, but her death made him colder, more calculating. He took refuge in work, in money, in Lucy, that woman who, from the very beginning, looked at me as if I were a burden. Lucy came into our lives with the smile of someone who seems sweet, but with the eyes of someone who calculates every word. I remember the first time he introduced her to me. She shook my hand with a force that felt fake. "A pleasure, Mr. Harrison," she said with a smile as white as her dress. She wasn't looking at me with warmth, but with inspection, as if she were sizing up the property. From the start, I knew she would be a crack in the family, but I kept quiet. "Teresa always said you shouldn't judge the person your son chooses to love." What irony. It was his love for her that pushed him away from me. Over time, Lucy made a point of putting distance between us. At first, it was subtle. "Your father's getting older, honey. Let him rest. Don't bother him with your problems. The house isn't really set up for visitors anymore. It's better if he stays in his." Each sentence was another brick in the wall she was building between father and son. And Daniel, blinded by the comfort and admiration his wife inspired in him, didn't see how she was manipulating him. But I saw it. And that was the worst part, watching your own son transform before your eyes and not being able to do anything. The years passed. The calls became sporadic. The visits, colder each time, came on Christmas, on birthdays, out of obligation. They brought expensive gifts but empty stares. And every time they left, the silence of the house weighed on me more. It was as if, with each visit, they took another piece of my soul with them. I remember one afternoon in particular, a few years back, Daniel came to talk to me about the wood shop I had founded. It was a small family business, fine carpentry. For decades, it was our livelihood and my pride. When Teresa died, Daniel took the reins. I thought it was the natural cycle that my son would continue the legacy. But he didn't. He turned it into something I no longer recognized. "Dad, times have changed," he told me that afternoon. "Your way of doing things is old-fashioned." "Maybe so," I replied, "but honesty and respect never go out of style." He laughed, a short, arrogant laugh. "It's not about that. It's that we don't need that way of thinking anymore. Everything is business." That day, I knew something had broken. We didn't speak the same language anymore. What was pride for me was an obstacle for him. What was love for me was an outstanding debt for him. Little by little, Lucy began to fill the space I had lost. She convinced him to sell part of the business, to move, to get away from the neighborhood where he grew up. Every decision pulled him further from his roots, from his mother, from me. And the worst part was, he thought it was progress. Sometimes he'd call me to ask for documents or signatures, but not to see me. Always with that dry, administrative tone, without a hint of affection. "Old man, I need you to sign this." "Dad, I'm sending the contract over. Just sign it." Not a, "How are you?" Not an, "I miss you." Only duties, never love. I remember the day he asked me to transfer the house into his name. It was the first time we argued with real harshness. "I don't want an inheritance," I told him. "I just want to live in peace." "It's not about that," he shot back, annoyed. "It's for security. You have no idea how things work now." "I have a very clear idea," I answered. "I know exactly how ingratitude works." He didn't insist after that, but his gaze changed. He no longer saw me as a father, but as an obstacle. The years continued their course. I became a blurry figure in his life, someone to be remembered only when it was convenient. Until that birthday arrived. My 63rd. Sometimes I think it was a gift from fate to hear what he said, as cruel as it sounded, because in that one sentence, "I hope this is the last candle he ever blows out," I finally understood who he was, and who I had allowed him to become. It wasn't just a wound, it was the confirmation of a truth I had ignored for too long. That love, when it isn't cared for, rots. And when it rots, it smells like contempt. That afternoon, after going over old papers with Robert, I made a promise to myself. I would not die with a heart full of bitterness. I would not give my son the satisfaction of seeing me defeated. I wouldn't take the pain with me. I would take peace. But before I could find it, I had to restore the balance, not with revenge, but with justice. That's how it all began. The wound wasn't bleeding anymore. Now it was scarring over. But under that new skin, something was beating strongly. A purpose. And when a man my age gets up with a purpose, nothing and no one can stop him. They say memories are like cracks in the soul. You can try to cover them with time, with silence, with distractions, but they're always there, filtering in what you don't want to feel again. That morning, after talking to Robert, I went back to the wood shop. It was almost in ruins. The tools hung on the wall, covered in dust, and the smell of old wood still permeated the air like a sigh from the past that refused to disappear. I put my hand on the workbench where I'd spent half my life, carving furniture, repairing dreams, giving shape to what the world forgot. I grew up there, and my son grew up there. But what was once a bond was now an open wound between us. As the sun came in through the window, I was flooded with memories of when Daniel was just a boy. He used to spend afternoons with me, sitting on a small stool, watching every move I made. He'd ask me endless questions. "Dad, why do the boards smell different when you cut them?" Or, "Why do you only wear gloves for the oak?" I'd answer impatiently, smiling. I liked seeing him curious, his eyes bright, with that spark kids only have when they still think their father is invincible. Teresa, my wife, would peek in the door every so often, laughing. "Let him breathe, Daniel. Your father needs to concentrate." But he wouldn't move. "I want to learn to build things like you, Dad," he'd say. That image stayed burned in my memory forever. The boy full of admiration, the woman I loved smiling at us from the doorway, and me, believing that happiness was eternal. How naive. Happiness, I learned later, is like damp wood. If you don't take care of it, it cracks. As the years went by, Daniel started to change. He didn't want to come to the shop anymore. He said it smelled bad, that his friends made fun of him because his father worked with his hands like a blue-collar laborer. It hurt to hear him say it, but I didn't show it. I just nodded and told him that all honest work deserves respect. He didn't answer. He was 15 and had a different look in his eye, the same one I later recognized in the mirror, the look of someone who's starting to be ashamed of the person who raised them. Before he went further down that path, Teresa got sick, a cancer that hit us like a storm without warning. For months, the house became a makeshift hospital. I worked endless shifts taking care of her, and Daniel, although he seemed strong at first, slowly began to disappear. He couldn't stand seeing her weak, he'd say, or maybe he couldn't stand facing the fear of losing her. I remember her last night. Teresa could barely speak, but she asked me to come closer. I took her hand, cold and light as a dry leaf, and she looked at me with those eyes that had always made me feel at home. "Edward," she told me, "promise me you won't let money change them. Promise me that when I'm gone, you'll take care of him, even when it hurts you." I promised I would. It was the hardest promise I ever made in my life, because loving her also meant accepting that her departure would leave a void impossible to fill. We buried her on a cloudy day. Daniel didn't cry. He stood motionless, his fists clenched. I wanted to hug him, but he pulled away. From then on, something broke between us. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, like a crack that opens over the years until everything collapses. After the funeral, the woodshop became a place of ghosts. I worked alone, without talking, without music, without the echo of Teresa's voice telling me to rest. And Daniel? Daniel drifted further away each day. Sometimes he wouldn't come home. Other times he'd come home late, smelling of alcohol, with a lost look in his eyes. One day he yelled at me, "You let her die." It was like he'd stabbed me in the soul. I didn't answer. There was no possible answer. Guilt, when you love someone, becomes an animal that never sleeps. Years passed and the distance became routine. When he met Lucy, I thought maybe she would bring some light. How wrong I was. Lucy didn't come to unite. She came to divide. From the beginning, I noticed the way she looked at him, not like a partner, but like a project. I saw ambition disguised as love in her eyes, but I kept quiet, out of respect, out of fear of pushing him further away. Teresa had asked me to, and that promise was the only thing still keeping me on my feet. Time kept moving. Daniel got married, had kids, moved away, and little by little, I ceased to exist in his world. He'd visit on special occasions with that condescending air of someone who thinks they've already risen above their origins. Sometimes he'd talk about investments, trips, plans, and I'd pretend to listen, although what I really felt was that his every word pushed me a little further from the son I once knew. One day, while I was fixing an old chair in the shop, I found a note Teresa had left among her things. It said, "If you ever feel like you can't go on, look at your hands. In them is everything you were capable of building. And if our son ever forgets who you are, let him fall. Sometimes only the ground teaches you to look at the sky." That note changed something in me. I didn't fully understand it then, but now, remembering it, I knew it was a warning. Teresa had seen what I refused to see. That blind love also destroys. I put the note back in my pocket and left the shop. The afternoon wind moved the branches of the lemon tree we planted the year Daniel was born. It didn't bear fruit anymore. The branches were dry, twisted. I went over and cut one of them off. The wood was hollow inside. That was us. Whole on the outside, but empty on the inside. And that's when I understood. The cracks weren't just in the past. They were in me too. And that night, for the first time, I let them hurt without hiding them. That night, it was raining like it hadn't rained in months. The sound of the water hitting the glass was constant, almost hypnotic, and in the midst of that noise, I found the courage to make the call I had been avoiding for years. The phone was on the table, next to the birthday candle I still had. I looked at it for a long time before dialing. It still had traces of melted wax at its base, as if it too had cried with me. I don't know if it was the rain, the loneliness, or Teresa's voice echoing in my mind, but that night I understood that silence was no longer protecting anyone. Silence, when it goes on too long, becomes an accomplice to contempt. I took a breath and dialed Robert Sullivan. We hadn't spoken in years. We'd been friends since we were young, when we worked together on the first contracts for the shop. Then he became a lawyer, I stayed in carpentry, and life took us down different paths. When Teresa died, he called me several times, but I didn't have the strength to answer. Now, after all this time, I heard his voice on the other end of the line, deep, a little tired, but still firm. "Edward," he said, his voice full of surprise. "I can't believe it. Is that you?" "Yeah, Robert, it's me." There was a brief silence. I could feel him trying to measure my words, to understand what had driven me to call him after so many years. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. "I've been better. But I'm not calling about that. I need to see you. Tomorrow, if possible." "Of course, man, wherever you want." "Not at my house?" My voice came out colder than I expected. "I'd prefer your office." I hung up without any more explanation. I didn't want to give details over the phone. I stood for a while, looking at the reflection of my face in the window. The man I saw there was no longer the same one who had raised Daniel. His hair was whiter, his eyes more sunken, the look of someone who has understood that love can also become a weapon if it's given without measure. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear, and the air smelled like damp earth. I got dressed in my best sport coat, the one Teresa gave me for our 30th anniversary, and headed downtown. I walked without rushing, my heart heavy but determined. I knew that what I was about to do would change the course of my family forever, but I also knew I couldn't go on being a spectator to my own humiliation. Robert's office was the same, walls covered in books, the smell of paper and old coffee, and a dim light coming through the side window. When he saw me walk in, he stood up immediately and hugged me. I felt a mix of surprise, affection, and concern in that gesture. "It's been too long, my friend," he said with a sad smile. "I thought you'd forgotten about the world." "I almost did," I replied, taking a seat. "But the world didn't forget about me." We spent a few minutes in silence, like two old friends reuniting with the years weighing on them, and too many things to say. Finally, he looked me in the eye and asked, "Why are you here, Edward?" I thought for a few seconds before answering. "Because I don't want to die a coward." I took a stack of yellowed documents from my briefcase, deeds, certificates, contracts. I spread them out on his desk. He looked at them carefully, adjusting his glasses. "Are these," he murmured, "the properties for the shop, the house, the accounts? Are they all still in your name?" "Yes." My voice was firm. "I never transferred them. Daniel tried several times, but I refused." Robert looked up, surprised. "Then legally, everything is still yours." "Exactly." I leaned toward him. "I want to move all of it." Robert was silent for a few seconds. He knew what I was asking for wasn't a simple transaction. He watched me with a frown. "Edward, this has to do with your son, doesn't it?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, with him, and with what he's become." I told him everything. The dinner, the words, the accumulated contempt, the years of distance, the way Lucy had manipulated him until he believed I was a burden. As I spoke, he didn't interrupt me once. He just listened, with that calm that men who have seen too many similar stories have. When I finished, he sighed. "I can't blame you for feeling this way," he said. "But tell me, what exactly do you want to do?" "I want to leave him with nothing," I answered, my voice steady. "But not out of hate, Robert, as a lesson. I want him to understand that respect isn't bought, that money doesn't make him invincible, that a man who despises his roots is condemned to be left without a shadow." Robert watched me in silence, his fingers laced on the desk. "What you're planning is big, Edward, and final. If you do this, there's no turning back." "I don't want to turn back," I said serenely. "I've already taken too many steps into silence. He nodded slowly, understanding that my decision was made. "All right," he said at last, "then we'll do this the right way. You won't leave any tracks, no legal loose ends, just the truth." And he picked up his pen. We spent hours reviewing documents, signing papers, adjusting details. Everything had to be done quietly, without raising suspicion. Robert was meticulous, as always. He explained that we would reorganize my assets under a new administration, leaving Daniel without any access. When we finished, he offered me a coffee. "I don't know if this will bring you peace," he said, "but at least it will give you back control." I smiled, tired. At my age, my friend, you're not looking for control. You're looking for respect. I left his office with my soul stirred, but lighter. The afternoon wind was blowing cold, but I didn't mind. I walked slowly down the avenue, watching people pass by, thinking about what was to come. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose. That night back at home, I sat in front of the hardened birthday cake and lit the candle one more time. The flame flickered, reflecting in my eyes. "You already know, Daniel," I whispered. "My wish is granted." And as the candle slowly burned down, the fire illuminated the face of a man who, at last, had decided to live again. I had never felt time move so slowly. Each dawn seemed longer than the last, as if the days were dragging on purpose, forcing me to think over and over about everything I had decided to do. But I didn't regret it. Not anymore. The decision was made, and there wasn't a trace of doubt left in me. At 63, you learn that justice doesn't always come from a judge, but from the soul that, tired of being silent, decides to speak. Over the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. I called Daniel as if nothing had happened. I asked about the kids, about work. At first, he was distant, as always, but little by little, he let his guard down. He told me about a new business, a real estate investment he was planning to make with his father-in-law's help. He mentioned that one day he'd inherit my house and the land the workshop was on, and that this would give him the final push he needed to grow. I listened patiently as the coffee grew cold in my hands. I didn't interrupt. I didn't tell him that those properties were already out of his reach. I just smiled and nodded, like someone listening to a stranger talk about a future that doesn't belong to him. That same afternoon, I went back to Robert's office. We had already signed the main documents, but the finer details were left: the bank transfers, the reallocation of shares, and the legal protection of my will. Everything had to be done discreetly, without alerting anyone. Robert greeted me with a tired look, but with the same firmness as always. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Edward?" he asked as he reviewed the folders. "More sure than ever," I replied without hesitating. "My son is no longer my son. He's a stranger who carries my last name." "I understand," he said, lowering his voice, "but what you're doing won't just affect him. It will also affect his children, his wife." "I know," I interrupted, "but they will get what they deserve. The example that respect isn't demanded, it's earned." Robert nodded and began to write. The papers piled up on the table. I signed one after another without trembling. With every signature, I felt a piece of my burden fall away. It wasn't resentment guiding me. It was liberation. For years, I had carried the weight of unrequited love, and now, finally, I was letting it go. When we finished, he handed me a copy of each document. "It's done," he said. "From this moment, Daniel is legally excluded from everything that belongs to you. Everything will pass into a trust, and the beneficiaries will be the people you choose." I looked at him, my eyes damp but firm. "Then I want the beneficiaries to be my grandchildren. They're not to blame for their parents' sins." Robert looked at me in silence. Maybe he understood that my revenge wasn't against my bloodline, but against arrogance. He shook my hand and said, "You're a just man, Edward. In your own way, but just." I smiled faintly. "I don't know about just, but at least I won't be naive anymore." That night, I returned home with a calm I hadn't felt in years. I poured myself a glass of wine and turned on the radio, something I hadn't done since Teresa was alive. An old song filled the air, a melody she used to sing while she cooked. I closed my eyes and imagined her there, in her flowered apron, dancing to the rhythm of that soft music. "Are you proud of me, my love?" I murmured. The silence answered me with tenderness. I felt that somehow she was with me every step of the way. I spent the next few days putting my life in order. I sold the car, liquidated a few secondary accounts, and closed the workshop. No one understood my decisions. The neighbors looked at me with curiosity, some with pity, thinking I was losing my mind. But I knew what I was doing. Every box I filled, every signature I stamped, was a page I was closing with determination. One Friday, Daniel showed up unannounced. He knocked on the workshop door, maybe out of habit or maybe intuition. I opened it cautiously. "What are you doing here, old man?" he said in his usual mocking tone. "I thought you were retired from everything." "That's what I'm trying to do," I replied serenely. He walked in without asking permission, looking around. "Wow, this place looks like a museum. You planning on selling it?" "Yes." "To who?" "To someone who still knows what it means to work with their hands." Daniel laughed, a dry, arrogant laugh. "Nobody pays for memories, Dad. People want results." "You said it," I replied, "and the results will be coming soon." He didn't press the issue. He left with the same disdain he had arrived with, not realizing that this would be the last day he'd see the workshop standing. The next day, I signed the final sale. A young craftsman bought it, someone who reminded me of myself when I was young. As I shook his hand, I felt something closing inside me, and something new beginning. I spent the weekend preparing a family lunch, not out of affection, but for closure. I wanted to see their faces together one last time, before showing them what I had really built in silence. I did the shopping myself: wine, a good roast, fresh-baked bread. I put fresh flowers on the table, and in the center, the old birthday candle. I wanted it to be there, a silent witness to what was about to happen. When I finished arranging everything, I looked at myself in the dining room mirror. I saw a different man. No longer a victim, no longer a wounded father, but someone who had learned to say enough without raising his voice. I smiled for the first time in a long time. That night, I wrote a letter. It wasn't long, but it was final. In it, there were no reproaches, no tears, just a truth written with calm. "Son, property can be inherited, but dignity is earned. You left me without a family, but not without a backbone. Tomorrow, you'll find out who I really am." I folded the letter and tucked it under the dining room tablecloth, right where he would be sitting. And so, as the house slept, I understood that the wish I'd made in front of that candle wasn't for revenge. It was to wake up. Sunday dawned clear, with a sky so clean it almost seemed like a joke. Everything was ready early. The table covered with the white tablecloth Teresa had embroidered by hand, the plates aligned, the wine breathing in the bottle, and the aroma of roast beef flooding the house. It was a perfect day to put an end to years of humiliation. As I moved back and forth, checking the final details, I felt my heart beating slowly, as if it knew this day would be different. There was no anger in me, no anxiety, just a strange peace, the calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. In the center of the table, the old birthday candle waited, lit, thin, almost consumed. I looked at it tenderly. It was my witness, the same flame I lit when I heard my son wish for my death. The sound of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. It was Daniel. He arrived with Lucy, his wife, and the kids, dressed in their Sunday best, smiling as if nothing was wrong. She entered first, looking around with that haughty expression she never lost. "What a surprise you invited us, Edward," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We thought you were, I don't know, upset." "No, Lucy," I replied serenely. "Today there's no room for anger. Today I just want to share a lunch as a family." Daniel shook my hand half-heartedly. I couldn't help but notice he didn't even look me in the eye. The kids ran out to the yard, laughing, not understanding the tension floating in the air. Behind them came Daniel's father-in-law, a man in an expensive suit and a fake smile, the same man who years ago tried to buy my land for a real estate project. I couldn't help but feel a slight chill. The irony of life. The man who wanted to take what I had worked for was now part of my family. We all sat down. The conversations were superficial, full of empty phrases. Lucy talked about vacations, her father about investments, and Daniel about his promising future. I listened to them without interrupting, like someone watching a play whose ending they already know. Every word they spoke confirmed the correctness of my decision. "Dad," Daniel said, raising his glass, "I want to make a toast." "Of course," I replied calmly. "To you," he said in a theatrical tone, "for everything you've done." Lucy smiled and nodded. "Yes, Edward," she added, "thank you for teaching us the value of hard work, even if some of your methods are a little outdated." Everyone laughed, everyone except me. I raised my glass, looking them in the eyes. "Let's toast, yes, but not to the past. Let's toast to the future." Daniel smiled, satisfied. "Exactly. To the future of the family." I nodded slowly. "Yes, to the future." I took a sip of wine and stood up. I walked to the china cabinet and took out an envelope. I left it in front of Daniel. "Before we eat, I want to give you something," I said. He took it, curious. "What is this?" "Your gift." He opened the envelope and began to read. As he read, his face began to change. First, disbelief, then confusion, and finally, panic. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It means," I replied without looking away, "that everything I owned, everything you took for granted as yours, no longer belongs to you. The house, the workshop, the accounts, everything has been transferred to your children." Lucy shot up abruptly, her eyes wide with panic. "What are you saying?" "You heard me," I told her. "The next time you talk about the future, make sure you have one." Silence fell over the table like a stone. The father-in-law cleared his throat, uncomfortable. The kids, oblivious, kept laughing in the yard. Daniel looked at me, his voice broken. "You can't do this to me, Dad." "I already did." "This is insane." "No, this is justice." Lucy slammed her hand on the table. "You're leaving us with nothing." "No, Lucy, I'm leaving you with what you built together. Nothing." Daniel stood up, furious. "You're going to regret this, old man." I stood up too, calmly. "I already have. For years I regretted staying silent, but today, no. Today, finally, I don't regret a thing." Lucy recoiled, pale. The father-in-law tried to mediate, but Daniel pushed him aside. He was beside himself. "And you think this makes you a better person?" he spat. "You're a miserable old man." I smiled serenely. "No, son. I'm the same man who taught you not to bite the hand that feeds you. Only now, I've learned the lesson too." There was a long, unbearable silence. I could hear the clock on the wall, each tick like a hammer in the air. No one said anything. Not even the kids who peeked into the dining room, confused by the shouting. "Dad," Daniel finally murmured, in a tone I hadn't heard from him since he was a child. "Yes?" I looked at him without resentment. "You can still call me that, if you remember what it means." Then I took one more sheet from the envelope. "Oh, and there's one more thing," I said. "What now?" Lucy asked, her voice cracking. "An invitation," I replied. "Tomorrow you'll receive a visit from the lawyer. He'll explain the details." I sat back down. I picked up my glass and took another sip of wine. No one moved. No one ate. The lunch grew cold in front of us. "You know what the saddest part is, Daniel?" I said in a low, almost paternal voice. "It wasn't losing you as a son. It was realizing that you never learned what love was. Teresa gave you tenderness. I gave you an example, but you chose arrogance, and that's the one thing I can't pass down to you." I stood up, left my glass on the table, and walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned back. By the way," I added, "dessert is in the fridge, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's as cold as you are." I went out into the yard, closed my eyes, and breathed deeply. The air was clean. The candle in the center of the table was still burning, small, flickering, but alive. I smiled. My wish had been granted. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was tormented by doubts, but because the silence after the storm has its own sound, an echo that gets into your bones. The house was still, too still. I could still smell the wine spilled on the tablecloth, the cold food on the table, Lucy's perfume mixed with the smoke of the candle that had finally burned out. It was the smell of an ending. I sat in the living room without turning on the lights. Outside, dogs barked in the distance, and inside, there was only the ticking of the clock. There was no remorse in me, not even sadness. What I felt was a strange calm, as if I had finally closed a wound that had been opened my whole life. But calm doesn't last when you know your decisions have shaken other people's worlds. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I didn't need to answer to know who it was. I let it ring until the call cut off. It rang again, once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. Then the texts started. "What did you do, Dad? You can't leave us like this. You've gone crazy." I read them all, one by one, without replying to any. When the last text arrived, a simple, "I hate you," I turned off the phone. It was the first time it didn't hurt to read those words. The dawn found me in the same armchair, the empty glass still in my hand. The sun came in through the window, and in that moment, I thought of Teresa, of what she would say if she saw everything that had happened. Maybe she would have called me stubborn. Maybe she would have cried. But I know that deep down, she would have understood. Because she always knew that love has to be defended, even when it hurts. Mid-morning, the sound of an engine in the driveway interrupted my peace. I looked through the window and saw Lucy's black car. She got out of the vehicle wearing dark sunglasses, her jaw tight. She walked to the door without hesitating. I touched the watch in my pocket out of instinct, not fear, just habit. When I opened the door, her voice cut the air. "What kind of monster are you?" she said. "One who learned too late," I replied calmly. "You left us with nothing. No house, no money, nothing," she yelled. "After everything we did for you." "You didn't do anything for me, Lucy," I said, looking at her serenely. "You did it for yourself, for your image, for your parties, for that emptiness you fill with jewelry." She shot me a venomous look. "Daniel is destroyed," she continued. "He keeps saying you betrayed him." "Betrayed him?" I laughed bitterly. "What I did was remind him who I am and who his mother was." "Your wife wouldn't have wanted this," she spat. "Don't you say her name," I warned her, my voice low but firm. "Don't you dare dirty her memory." Lucy took a step back, trembling with rage. For an instant, I saw fear in her eyes, not because she thought I'd hurt her, but because she understood she couldn't manipulate me anymore. "You're going to end up alone, Edward," she said, trying to wound me. "Alone and forgotten." "No, Lucy," I replied. "I've been alone for years, ever since you all walked out that door and didn't look back." She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she turned and left without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the house. I stood there, motionless, listening to her car speed away. I didn't move. I didn't feel relief or guilt, just a deep exhaustion, the kind you feel after fighting your whole life for a cause nobody wanted to understand. At noon, Robert arrived. He brought the final documents. His face showed concern, but also respect. "I figured you might need company today," he said as he entered. "No," I replied, offering him a coffee. "Today, I just need silence." He sat with me in the kitchen without saying a word. For a long while, the only sound was the steam rising from the coffee mug. Finally, he spoke. "You know your son is going to try to reverse this, right?" "I know," I answered without hesitation, "but he won't be able to. Everything is legally protected." "So this is final?" "It is," Robert sighed. "I'm not judging you, Edward. I just hope you don't end up drowning in the very thing you're trying to clean up." "I'm not drowning," I told him, looking out the window. "I'm just emptying myself out. And when a man empties himself out, he leaves space to breathe again." He nodded. He gave me a pat on the shoulder and left. That afternoon, as the sun began to set, I lit a candle on my desk. It wasn't the birthday candle. It was a new one. I watched it burn for a long time. Fire has a hypnotic quality. It destroys, but it also purifies. And in that moment, I understood that my family name, the one I thought was eternal, had been reduced to that. Ashes. Daniel carried my blood, yes, but not my soul. The Harrison name no longer meant honor or work, but arrogance, ambition, forgetfulness. And that hurt more than any wound. But it also freed me, because for the first time, I could look at my reflection without shame. I snuffed out the candle with my fingers, unafraid of the heat. The smoke rose slowly, drawing a shape that disappeared in seconds. I thought about the lemon tree in the yard, the one Teresa and I planted the day Daniel was born. I went outside and looked at it. It was still dry, but from one of the branches, a small green shoot was sprouting. I stood there, looking at it in silence. Sometimes life has cruel ways of telling you that not all is lost. A few days had passed since that lunch that shattered the foundations of what I once called a family. The house remained silent, but it was no longer a painful silence. It was different, a clean silence without the shadow of resentment. I'd get up early, make coffee, open the windows, and let the sun stream in without asking permission. For the first time in many years, the solitude didn't weigh on me. It belonged to me. I thought I'd never see them again. Not my son, not Lucy, not the kids. And the truth is, I wasn't expecting to. But one Tuesday afternoon, while I was sweeping the patio, I heard the doorbell. When I opened the door, I saw something that made my heart stop. It wasn't Daniel, it was the kids, all three of them, with their backpacks hanging off their shoulders and their eyes wide, confused. Behind them, a young woman, the nanny, greeted me with a mix of respect and nervousness. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "your son asked me to have you watch them this afternoon. He has urgent business to attend to." Urgent, I thought. It always was when it came to facing the consequences of his actions. The kids ran inside. It had been so long since I'd heard their laughter in this house that for a moment I felt like time was moving backward. The youngest, Matthew, stopped in front of Teresa's portrait. "Was that Grandma?" he asked, pointing at the photo. "Yes," I replied, smiling gently. "And you have her eyes." The boy stared at her for a few seconds, as if trying to remember a face he'd never known. Then he ran to the yard, and the others followed. They spent the afternoon playing in the dry leaves, laughing, getting dirty, making up stories. I watched them from the porch with a strange feeling, as if my heart, after being asleep for so many years, was starting to beat hard again. When they got tired, I sat them at the table and served them juice and cookies, just like Teresa used to do with Daniel when he was little. I didn't plan it. It just came naturally. The oldest, Nicholas, watched me silently as he ate. "My dad is mad at you," he said with the brutal honesty only kids have. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know. He says you betrayed him." "Maybe," I replied. "But sometimes you do the right thing, even if other people don't understand it." Nicholas looked at me curiously, and then, without a word, went back to his cookie. He didn't press it. Maybe he understood more than his father ever wanted to. When the nanny came back for them as evening fell, Matthew hugged me without asking permission. "Can we come back?" he asked. "Of course, kid. This will always be your house." I watched them walk away down the path, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled without sadness. The next morning, I found a small envelope under the door. It was a clumsily folded sheet of paper written in a child's handwriting. It said, "Grandpa, thanks for letting us play. Dad cries when he thinks we're not looking. I don't understand why you're fighting, but I want you to like each other again. Mom says you're mean, but I don't think so. Mean people don't make juice and cookies for kids. I love you." Nicholas was signed at the bottom with a juice stain on the ink. I stood there reading that note over and over. It was like a seed buried in dry earth. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't guilt or regret. It was hope, a soft, warm hope that reminded me of the words Teresa left in that old note. "If our son ever forgets who you are, let him fall. Sometimes only the ground teaches you to look at the sky." Maybe that ground was already hitting him. Maybe for the first time, Daniel was starting to look up. The following days felt different. I went to the yard and looked at the lemon tree. That dry branch that had shown signs of life now had new leaves, green and small. I stared at them for a long time. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The tree I thought was dead was coming back to life, and I couldn't help but think that, in a way, I was too. Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Daniel was proud. He wouldn't just sit back. Sooner or later, he would come to confront me. And when he did, I wanted to receive him with the truth, not with hate. Because by this point, I had understood that revenge without purpose turns to poison. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to learn. That night, sitting at my desk, I opened a new notebook. Not to write down accounts or documents. I wanted to leave something different. My story. The truths I never said. The letters I never sent. The wounds I never showed. I thought about the kids, about the day when perhaps many years from now they would read these pages. I wrote on the first page, "This is not a story of punishment. but of memory. Because sometimes loving also means teaching how to lose. I closed the notebook. I turned off the light and stood for a while looking out the window. In the sky, a single star shone brighter than the rest. Teresa, I thought. You always knew that even wounded roots can flower again. I knew that moment would come. You didn't have to be a psychic to understand that Daniel's silence was just the prelude to a storm. I could feel it, the way you feel the air before it rains, thick, charged with electricity. I didn't know when he would show up, but I knew he would. Men like my son can't stand losing control. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was gray, and the wind was moving the dining room curtains. I was sitting by the window, reading, when I heard the unmistakable sound of his car pulling up. I didn't run to open it. I didn't have to. I stayed where I was, waiting. The knock on the door was sharp, impatient. "Dad!" his voice yelled, that voice that had given me so many orders disguised as requests. "Open up!" I stood up calmly. When I turned the knob and saw him, I felt time stop. He looked different. The impeccable suit, the scruffy beard, the deep dark circles under his eyes. He was an exhausted man, and yet the fury in his eyes was still alive. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, his steps hard, his fists clenched. "So this is what you wanted," he said without even a hello. "To humiliate me in front of everyone, to ruin my life?" "I didn't ruin anything, Daniel," I replied. "I just took off the costume." "You're a miserable old man," he spat. "Do you know how hard I worked to build what I have?" "I know, and I also know how hard you worked to destroy what you were." His breathing was fast, nervous. He ran a hand through his hair and started pacing. "Lucy is beside herself," he continued. "Her parents are demanding explanations. The banks are pressuring me. And you just sit here, calm, as if you hadn't done anything." "I did what I had to." "What you had to? Leave me with nothing? You think that's fair?" "I gave you everything," I said slowly. "Everything I had, including my time. And you paid me back with contempt. Don't confuse justice with punishment." Daniel stopped in front of me. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me, but he didn't. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't define. Anger, sadness, fear, or maybe shame. "And the kids?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Did you use them too? Did you put them in the middle of this?" "No. I protected them," I answered firmly. "They're not to blame. You are." He fell silent. I watched him try to hold back tears, but his pride wouldn't let him. I know him too well. He was always like that, unable to cry in front of anyone. "I got a letter," he finally said, his voice low. "From Nicholas." My heart skipped a beat. What did it say? "That he loves you," he answered bitterly. "That he doesn't believe what we say about you. That you're good." I didn't know what to say. The image of the boy writing that note came back to me like a punch in the chest. "Maybe you should listen to your son," I told him. "I don't need advice from you." "Of course you do," I replied gently. "Because what you're doing to them is the same thing you did to me." Daniel looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "About the chain," I said. "About that pride that gets passed from father to son like a curse. I was hard on my father too. I also thought love was shown with silence and discipline. But the day I lost your mother, I understood that loving means saying, 'I need you.' And you never learned that." Daniel gritted his teeth. "I don't need your pity." "You don't have it," I replied calmly. "What I'm offering you is the truth." He stood still, looking at me. The silence between us was as heavy as a stone. Outside, the wind kept blowing. The portrait of Teresa on the wall seemed to be watching us, as if she too had been waiting for this moment. "Why did you do all this?" he finally asked, not yelling, without anger. Just tired. "Because I couldn't stand seeing you as a stranger anymore," I answered. "I had to do something to make you look me in the eye again." "And you think you accomplished that with this?" "I don't know, but at least now you're listening to me." Daniel looked down. For an instant, he seemed to surrender. He walked over to the table, saw the notebook where I was writing my memories, and ran his fingers over the cover. "What is this?" "My story," I replied. "For your kids. So they know that dignity is inherited too." He nodded slowly. Then he set the notebook down and walked to the door. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said without turning around. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "I'm just asking you to understand." Before he left, he stopped for a second in front of his mother's portrait. He looked at it for a long time, in silence, and without looking at me, he said something barely audible. "I miss her." When the door closed, I was alone again. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't the echo of a war, but the sigh of a truce. I went out to the yard. The lemon tree was still growing, green, alive. I cut a small branch and put it in a glass of water on the table. I looked at Teresa's portrait and whispered, "Maybe, my love, there's still something left to save." That night, the silence returned to my house, but it wasn't the same. There was something different about it, a kind of invisible murmur that kept me company as I walked the halls. It wasn't guilt, nor was it relief. It was something more like what a father feels when he stops fighting the inevitable and, finally, learns to see life as it is. Daniel had left hours ago, but his presence was still there. The echo of his footsteps, the tremor in his voice when he mentioned his mother, his lost gaze as he looked away from the portrait. There was something in him I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. That same vulnerability I once had, but that time, work, and loss had forced me to bury. I sat in the living room with the notebook open in front of me, the pen between my fingers, and I started writing without really knowing why. I wasn't trying to leave a lesson or justify my actions. I just needed to put into words what I had kept silent for decades. "Dear son," I wrote, "if you ever read this, I want you to know that it wasn't hate that guided me, but pain. Because love that isn't respected ends up rotting, and a father who doesn't defend himself ends up disappearing. I didn't want to punish you, Daniel. I just wanted to remind you who you were before you forgot your roots." I stopped. The sound of distant thunder pulled me from my thoughts. I got up and went to the bedroom. From the closet, I took an old wooden box, the kind Teresa used to keep letters and photographs in. I opened it carefully. Inside were yellowed envelopes, black and white photos, and a folded handkerchief, her scent almost completely faded. But among all those things, there was something I had never seen. A sealed envelope with my name and Daniel's written in her handwriting. I stared at that envelope for a long time. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if I had the strength to read it, but I opened it anyway. Inside were 2 letters, separated by a red ribbon. The first said, "For you, Edward." The second, "For Daniel." I started with mine. "My love, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. And I know that hurts you more than you want to admit. But I want to ask you for something, and I know it's hard. Don't lock yourself up in your grief. Don't turn it into silence. Don't raise our son with fear, because fear disguises love as hardness, and children mistake that for indifference." I felt a lump in my throat. I kept reading, tears blurring my vision. "He will love you in his own way, and his way won't always be yours. But when he hurts you, don't respond with more wounds. Respond with patience. Remind him who you are. And if he ever gets lost, don't look for him in memories. Look for him in his actions. Time doesn't erase love. It only hides it." I had to close my eyes. Teresa always knew how to see what I couldn't. While I was fighting to keep the family together, she understood that love isn't imposed, it's planted. I held her letter to my chest over my heart and picked up the second one. I hesitated for a few seconds before opening it. "Son," it said, "when you read this, I probably won't be here anymore. But I want you to remember something I never told you enough. Your father loves you. More than you will ever know. He doesn't always show it, because work, pride, and life have hardened him. But every sacrifice he made, every night he came home tired, was for you. If you ever feel he demands too much of you, understand that it's his clumsy way of protecting you. And if one day you judge him, remember that fathers make mistakes too. But almost always, they come from a place of love." I had to rest the letter on my knees. The tears were falling uncontrollably. It was as if Teresa's voice were right there, speaking to both of us from somewhere where tenderness doesn't die. I stayed like that for a while, in silence, letting the paper absorb my tears. Then, carefully, I put both letters back in the original envelope and sealed it again. I felt I shouldn't keep it for myself. That letter wasn't just for me. It was for us. The next day, the sun rose bright, with a clear sky that seemed impossible after so many weeks of clouds. I got dressed without rushing, took the envelope, and started walking to Daniel's house. Every step felt heavy, not from fear, but from the certainty of what this represented. When I got there, the door was ajar. I heard voices inside, Lucy, the kids, and the TV on. I knocked twice. Lucy opened it, surprised. "What are you doing here?" she asked, suspicious. "I came to see my son," I said serenely. She didn't wait for an answer. She called for Daniel, and he appeared a few seconds later. His face was gaunt, but his look was no longer one of anger, but of exhaustion. "What do you want now?" he asked without energy. "To leave you this," I replied, holding out the envelope. "It's from your mother." For a moment, the air seemed to stand still. Daniel took it with trembling hands. "Where did you find it?" "In a box. I had it all these years without knowing it was there." "Did you read it?" "Mine, yes. Yours, no." He nodded slowly without speaking. I looked him in the eye. "Read it, son. But do it alone. And when you're done, don't call me. Don't look for me. Just think about what she wanted to tell you." I turned to leave, but before I stepped out, I heard his voice. "Dad." I stopped. "Thank you," he whispered. I didn't answer. I just nodded and walked out into the sun. That afternoon, I went back home. I sat in the yard under the lemon tree. The wind moved the branches and a fresh scent filled the air. I closed my eyes and felt something inside me settle. I don't know how much time passed, but at some point, I knew Daniel had read the letter. I knew it without him telling me, because the wind changed, and in it, I thought I heard Teresa's voice murmuring, "It's okay now, Edward. It's okay." That night, I slept in peace for the first time. Not because everything was resolved, but because I understood that redemption doesn't always come in the form of forgiveness. Sometimes it comes on a yellowed sheet of paper, written with love. 3 days have passed since I left Teresa's letter in Daniel's hands. I haven't seen him since. I didn't expect to. Everyone needs their own time to face what hurts, and his, I know well, is the time of silence. But still, there's something in the air, a different feeling, as if the weight of so many years were slowly beginning to lift. The days pass quietly. The sun comes through the windows of the house with a kinder light, and the lemon tree in the yard, the one I thought was dead, already has small blossoms. I counted them this morning. 5. I don't know why, but I felt that number was symbolic. Maybe because it had been 5 years since we had truly spoken, even when we were at the same table. I've spent the last few afternoons writing in my notebook, not about Daniel or the inheritance or even Teresa. I write about simple things. The light at 6 in the evening, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of the wind slipping through the curtains. I've realized that peace, when it arrives, doesn't make a sound. It just sits beside you and waits for you to acknowledge it. Yesterday, while I was sweeping the patio, I heard the sound of a car stopping out front. I didn't look right away. I kept sweeping, as if time was in no hurry. I heard footsteps approaching, the creak of the gate, and then his voice. "Dad." I turned slowly. Daniel was standing there, empty-handed with an expression I didn't recognize. He wasn't wearing a suit or a tie, just a simple wrinkled shirt, and a look that I couldn't tell if it was sadness or exhaustion. "Hello, son," I said without surprise. "Can I come in?" "You always could." He walked in slowly, looking at everything around him. The house was the same, but to him it seemed new. He ran his hand over the back of a chair. He touched the frame of a photo of Teresa, and then he sat across from me in the dining room. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Just the clock, marking time. "I read the letter," he said at last. I nodded. "I figured. I didn't know Mom thought that way." "Me neither," I replied. "Until recently." He stared at the table. "She said, to understand you," he continued, his voice low, "not to judge what I didn't know. Your mother was always wiser than I was. She also said, to tell you I'm sorry." The silence that followed was long. Daniel's eyes were damp, but he didn't cry. He never cries. And yet, his whole body seemed to be. I didn't come to say it, he murmured. Not yet. You don't have to, I said. There are some things the soul understands without them being spoken. Then, without a word, he stood up and went out to the yard. I followed him. He stopped in front of the lemon tree and looked at the white blossoms hanging from the branches. It's alive, he said, almost to himself. Yes, I replied. Sometimes life disguises itself as death, only to come back stronger. Daniel reached out and gently touched one of the flowers. Did you plant it? We both did. Your mother and I. The year you were born. He smiled faintly. I don't remember that. It's normal, I told him. Kids forget. Parents remember. We stood like that for a while, in silence. The sun was setting slowly, and the shadow of the lemon tree covered part of the yard. Daniel looked at the ground. Then he looked at me. I brought something, he said. He went back to the car and returned with a small frame. He handed it to me without speaking. It was an old photo of Teresa, him, and me in the wood shop. A neighbor had taken it when Daniel was 8. She was smiling, her hands on my shoulders, and he, covered in sawdust, was holding a hammer that was too big for him. The photo had a torn corner, but it was still perfect. I found it in a box, he said. I thought it should be with you. I didn't know what to say. I just held it carefully, as if I were afraid the air would erase it. Thank you, son. No. He shook his head gently. Thank you. It was then I noticed something in his gaze. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder, more real, understanding. That look you only get when love shakes off its pride and shows itself as it is, imperfect, tired, but still alive. We sat under the lemon tree. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We talked about the shop, about the kids, about work, small things, and although the words were simple, the tone was different. For the first time in years, Daniel was talking to me without distance, not as an old man you have to be patient with, but as a father. When the sun began to set, he stood up. I have to go, he said. The kids say hi. Tell them I'm waiting for them whenever they want. He nodded. He took a few steps toward the gate, but before leaving, he turned and looked at me one more time. Dad? Yeah? Take care of it, he said, pointing to the lemon tree. I promise I'll come by to watch it grow. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't need one. I watched him walk away down the path, hands in his pockets, his gait slow, different, and I knew I didn't need to hear an apology when I had already seen it in his eyes. That night, I lit a candle and placed it next to the photo he had brought me. Teresa was smiling. Daniel was too. And I, in the reflection of the glass, caught myself smiling as well. Sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken. It's breathed in. And when it comes, all you can do is let your soul rest. I haven't marked the days on the calendar in a long time. I don't need to anymore. When you learn to live without resentment, time stops being a countdown and becomes a silent gift. Every morning I open the windows, let the fresh air in, and breathe deep. The world is the same, but I'm not. The lemon tree blossomed. I saw it today from my chair on the porch, taller, with branches full of life. Its leaves shone in the afternoon sun, and bees buzzed around it. I thought of Teresa, of her soft voice, telling me that life always finds a way to be reborn. She was right. She always was. Weeks have passed since Daniel last came to see me. I don't blame him. Everyone has their own pace for healing. But since that day under the lemon tree, something changed. His texts no longer sound like reproaches, but like presents. Sometimes he writes to tell me about the kids, or just to say, "Good night, old man," and that's enough for me. I don't need more. This morning, while I was drinking my coffee, I found a letter in the mailbox with no return address. It was his handwriting. Inside, just a few lines. I read Mom's letter again. I understand everything now. Thanks for not giving up on me. I love you. Nothing more. But it was enough. I stared at those trembling words, written with the clumsiness of someone not used to saying what they feel, and I smiled. Not with pride, but with gratitude. I put the letter in the notebook where I'd written my story. That notebook I started the day I decided to end the silence. It's almost full now. Each page is a confession, a lesson, a farewell. I don't know if anyone will ever read it, Maybe my grandchildren when they're older. Maybe no one. But it doesn't matter. What mattered was writing it, letting the words empty me out. The doctor says my heart is tired. I believe him. Not from sickness, but from the journey. It's been many years, many battles. But I'm not afraid. Death isn't scary when you've learned to say goodbye on your feet. Today I decided to sort through some things. I took out the old documents, the photos, the watches I don't use anymore. I made 3 piles on the table. One for Daniel, one for the kids, and one to leave at the woodshop. The one that no longer belongs to me, but where my soul still lives. In Daniel's pile, I put the notebook. On the first page, I added a few new lines. Don't feel guilty for being late to love. Some people take a lifetime to recognize it, and it's still worth it. After that, I went out to the yard. I sat under the lemon tree, the same place Teresa used to read in the afternoons. The sun was falling golden on the leaves, and the air smelled of blossoms and damp earth. I closed my eyes and listened to the world, the song of the birds, the distant sound of a child laughing in the street, the rustling of branches in the wind. It was life telling me that everything was okay. I thought about Daniel, about my grandchildren, about what would come after me, and I knew that somehow the story would continue. Not as an inheritance of property, but of memory. Because what you leave behind aren't things, but footprints, and my footprints finally were no longer bleeding. I began to feel a sweet tiredness, the kind that doesn't hurt. I leaned my head against the back of the chair and looked at the sky. A white cloud was passing slowly, and in it I thought I saw the shape of a familiar face, Teresa, smiling, like the last time I saw her. "It's done, my love," I whispered. "Our son came home." The wind blew stronger, and for a moment the blossoms from the lemon tree fell on me like white rain. I closed my eyes and let them cover me. Maybe Daniel will come tomorrow. Maybe he'll find the notebook on the table and read it. Maybe he'll sit right here, under this tree, with his children running around him. I don't know, but if he does, I want him to understand one thing, that love, even when it breaks, always leaves roots, and that sometimes a single new flower is enough to remember that life goes on. The sun began to set. I felt the warmth on my face, my heart beating slowly, as if marking the end of a melody. I smiled, because for the first time, I didn't feel alone. And as the day died, I thought about that candle I blew out on my birthday, the one where I made my wish. Yes, Daniel. My wish came true. Sometimes life doesn't give us second chances, but it does give us time. Time to understand, to forgive, and to look back without resentment. Because in the end, parents aren't eternal, and children don't always understand in time. But when the silence breaks, when an "I love you" arrives after years, it still has the same value. It's never too late to come home. This story isn't just about pain, but about love. The love that survives mistakes, pride, and time. And if life teaches us anything, it's that forgiveness isn't always said with words. Sometimes it's said with a hug or with a flower that grows again where there were once thorns. If this story touched your heart, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Every day we share new stories full of emotion, reflection, and life. Stories that remind us that there's always a chance to heal and that love, true love, never dies. We'll see you in the next story.